What would you do if an 8-year-old girl in duct-taped sneakers claimed she could fix your $1 million private jet? And she was right. Vincent Blackwood's Gulfstream G650 sat grounded at Clearwater Regional Airport with a failed navigation system. 4 professional mechanics were stumped, and a $300 million deal hung in the balance. That's when a small girl with tangled hair and a faded jacket walked up to the head mechanic and said, "I can fix your plane, mister." Then she proceeded to diagnose the exact problem that had baffled aviation experts for 6 hours. But here's what nobody knew yet. What would change everything? That thin silver necklace she wore around her neck wasn't just jewelry. Those were real pilot wings, the kind earned through sacrifice and service. And Vincent Blackwood was about to recognize them, because 15 years ago, those same wings had belonged to the pilot who saved his life. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning air at Clearwater Regional Airport carried the sharp bite of a Montana winter, cutting through Vincent Blackwood's wool overcoat as he paced outside Hangar 7. His breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the dry air, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against the concrete with increasing irritation. The sound echoed off the metal walls of the hangar, mixing with the distant hum of aircraft engines and the occasional radio chatter from the control tower. Inside the hangar, his pride and joy sat like a sleeping giant. The Gulfstream G650, with its pristine white fuselage and navy blue trim, represented more than just transportation. It was his mobile office, his sanctuary above the clouds, his ticket to staying ahead in a world where being 3 steps behind meant bankruptcy. Today, it was also his biggest problem. Bobby Knight, the airport's head mechanic, emerged from beneath the aircraft's nose section, wiping his hands on a greased rag. His coveralls bore the patches of 23 years in aviation maintenance, and his weathered face showed the kind of concern that made wealthy men nervous. "Still nothing, Mr. Blackwood," Bobby called out, his voice carrying the weight of professional defeat. "We've checked every connection twice. Tommy and I pulled the main navigation panel, tested all the backup systems. Everything looks perfect on paper." Vincent stopped pacing and fixed Bobby with a stare that had intimidated boardrooms from New York to Tokyo. "Perfect on paper doesn't get me to Chicago tonight. I've got a meeting in 6 hours that's worth more than this airport sees in revenue all year." Tommy Rodriguez, barely 22 and still learning the trade, poked his head out from behind the landing gear. His face was smudged with hydraulic fluid, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his work light. The pressure of working on such an expensive aircraft under the owner's watchful eye was clearly getting to him. "Maybe we should call in someone from Denver," Tommy suggested, his voice cracking slightly. "There's a specialist there who works on these Gulfstream systems." Vincent's phone buzzed insistently in his coat pocket. The 5th call from his assistant in the past hour. Marcus Webb's increasingly frantic messages about rescheduling backup plans and damage control. Vincent ignored it. There were no backup plans. This deal had taken 18 months to set up, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. The hangar doors stood wide open, letting in the cold air and the sounds of airport life. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency around smaller aircraft, their orange vests bright against the gray morning sky. A fuel truck rumbled past, its driver raising a casual hand in greeting to Bobby, who was too focused on the problem at hand to notice. Near the maintenance area, partially hidden behind a stack of oil drums and spare parts, sat Mia Richardson. She'd been there for over an hour, perched on an overturned milk crate that someone had abandoned near the tool storage. Her notebook was open on her lap, and she sketched with the focused intensity of a child completely absorbed in her world. Her jacket had seen better days. The denim faded to an almost white blue in places, with patches sewn on by careful hands. Her sneakers had definitely seen worse days, with duct tape wrapped around the left sole where the rubber had separated from the canvas. But her eyes were bright and alert, following every movement of the mechanics, every gesture, every frustrated headshake. The silver chain around her neck caught the overhead lights when she moved, and the small pendant that hung from it seemed oddly substantial for such a young girl. It wasn't a typical child's jewelry, nothing pink or sparkly or cute. It was serious metal with the weight of something that mattered. Vincent noticed her for the first time when Bobby's radio crackled to life, startling him from his brooding. Ray Green's voice came through the static, professional but tinged with curiosity. "Bobby, you copy? I've got Mr. Blackwood's flight plan still showing departure for 9:30. We're going to need to update that." Bobby keyed his mic, glancing apologetically at Vincent. "Yeah, Ray, going to be a while longer, maybe a lot longer. Copy that? I'll let Tower know to keep that slot flexible." Vincent's frustration boiled over. He pulled out his phone and jabbed at the screen, calling Marcus for the 6th time that morning. The call connected immediately. "Marcus, I don't care what you have to do. Charter something, buy something. I need to be in the air within 2 hours. His assistant's voice came through, tiny and stressed. "Sir, I've tried everything. There's nothing available with the range you need. The closest option is a smaller jet out of Billings. But you'd need to make 2 stops, and you'd still miss the morning session." Vincent closed his eyes and counted to 5. A habit his father had taught him during his first hostile takeover. Never let emotion drive business decisions. But this wasn't just business. This was his reputation, his word, his entire carefully constructed empire balanced on the edge of one malfunctioning aircraft. "Keep trying," he said finally. "And get legal ready to draw up breach of contract provisions. If this deal falls through because of mechanical failure, someone's going to pay." He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket, only to notice that the small girl had stood up and was walking directly toward Bobby. Her movement was purposeful, not the wandering curiosity of a child exploring. She had the deliberate stride of someone with something to say. Vincent was about to intervene, to call security, or at least shoo the child away from the expensive machinery, when she spoke. "I can fix your plane, mister." Her voice carried clearly across the hangar, cutting through the ambient noise of tools and radio chatter. It wasn't the high-piping voice of most 8-year-olds. It was steady, confident, matter-of-fact. Bobby looked down at her, his expression softening into the kind of gentle smile adults reserved for children who don't understand the complexity of adult problems. "That's real sweet, honey. But this isn't a bicycle with a flat tire. This is serious machinery." Mia didn't smile back. She tilted her head slightly, listening to something only she could hear, then pointed directly at the open access panel beneath the aircraft's nose. "Your navigation computer isn't getting clean power because the secondary relay in junction box C7 is stuck in partial engagement. You can hear it in the electrical signature if you know what to listen for. It's not your main processing board. It's not your backup systems. And it's not your wiring harness. It's a $37 relay that's been intermittently failing for probably 3 weeks. The hangar fell silent except for the distant sound of an approaching aircraft and the steady hum of the overhead lights. Bobby's smile faded completely. Tommy straightened up from behind the landing gear, his eyes wide. Vincent stopped breathing. In 30 seconds, an 8-year-old girl in duct-taped sneakers had provided a more specific diagnosis than 4 aviation professionals with decades of combined experience. Bobby recovered first, his professional skepticism warring with genuine curiosity. "Little girl, where did you learn words like that?" Mia's hand moved unconsciously to the pendant at her throat, her fingers closing around it briefly. "My mama taught me," she said. "Airplanes talk to you if you know how to listen." Vincent stepped forward, his business instincts overriding his shock. "And where exactly is your mother, young lady?" The question hung in the air for a moment longer than it should have. Mia's eyes flickered with something deeper than sadness, something that made Vincent suddenly regret asking. "She's not here anymore," Mia said quietly. "But she taught me lots of things before she left." Tommy wiped his hands nervously on his coveralls. "Bobby, maybe we should check junction box C7. I mean, it couldn't hurt to look, right?" Bobby nodded slowly, still staring, and Mia, with a mixture of wonder and professional caution, Yeah, let's take a look." He paused. "But honey, you need to step back while we work. This is still dangerous equipment." Mia nodded and returned to her milk crate, but Vincent noticed she positioned herself where she could see everything clearly. Her notebook remained open, but she wasn't drawing anymore. She was watching, evaluating, waiting. Bobby and Tommy disappeared beneath the aircraft, their voices muffled by the fuselage, but their words still audible in the quiet hangar. "Junction box C7, Bobby muttered. "Haven't checked that one specifically." "There." Tommy's voice carried excitement. "Bobby, look at this relay. The connections are all corroded. I'll be damned. Hand me that multimeter." Vincent found himself holding his breath as electronic beeping filled the air, followed by Bobby's increasingly animated voice. "Tommy, this relay is only getting 60% engagement. No wonder the navigation system couldn't get consistent power." A pause, then louder. "How in the hell did an 8-year-old girl know that?" Vincent looked across the hangar at Mia, who sat calmly on her crate, one hand still touching the pendant at her throat. Her eyes met his across the distance, and for a moment he felt like he was looking at someone much older than 8 years old, someone who knew things she shouldn't know, someone who wore pilot wings like they belonged to her. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Bobby Knight emerged from beneath the Gulf Stream, holding a small electronic component that looked unremarkable to most people, but represented the difference between success and catastrophe for Vincent Blackwood. The relay was no bigger than a matchbox, its metal contacts showing the telltale green corrosion that spoke of moisture infiltration and gradual failure. "She was right," Bobby announced, his voice carrying equal parts amazement and professional embarrassment. "Dead-on accurate. This little piece of junk has been causing intermittent power drops to the entire navigation suite." Tommy Rodriguez scrambled out from the access panel, his face flushed with excitement and relief. "Bobby, I've never seen anything like it." The way she described the electrical signature, the specific junction box, even the failure pattern. That's graduate-level avionics troubleshooting. Vincent stared at the corroded relay, then shifted his gaze to Mia, who sat quietly, observing their reactions. She hadn't moved from her makeshift seat, but something in her posture suggested she was unsurprised by their discovery, as if she'd known all along what they would find. "How long to replace it?" Vincent asked, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Bobby turned the component over in his weathered hands. "That's the problem. This is a specialized part for the G650s. Avionics package. We don't stock these. I'll need to order one from the manufacturer, and even with expedited shipping, we're looking at 48 hours minimum." The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. 48 hours meant missing not just the morning session, but the entire Chicago deal. 18 months of negotiations, 3 separate due diligence processes, and countless millions in potential profit, all evaporating because of a $37 part. His phone buzzed again. Marcus, probably with more bad news about charter alternatives. Vincent ignored it and walked over to where Mia sat, his expensive shoes echoing in the sudden quiet of the hangar. "Young lady," he said, crouching down to her eye level, "you seem to know quite a bit about aircraft systems." Mia nodded solemnly. "Some things. Do you know anything about where we might find a replacement relay on short notice?" She considered this seriously, her small fingers still absently touching the pendant at her throat. "Maybe. Depends on what else is around here." Bobby overheard and approached, carrying his tablet with the part specifications displayed. "Honey, this is a very specific component. It's not like we can just grab something similar from another plane." Mia stood up and walked over to Bobby, studying the screen with an intensity that made both men uncomfortable. She was reading the technical specifications with the fluency of someone who understood every acronym and measurement. "The relay itself is standard," she said after a moment. "It's the mounting bracket and the connector that are proprietary to Gulfstream. But if you had the right tools and some basic electronics knowledge, you could modify a compatible relay to work." Tommy's eyebrows shot up. "Modify? You mean jury-rig an aircraft navigation system?" "Not jury-rig," Mia corrected patiently. "Adapt. My mama used to say that sometimes the best solution isn't the prettiest one. It's the one that gets people home safe." Vincent felt something stir in his chest at the way she said, "Mama," with that particular mix of reverence and loss that spoke of fresh grief. "What kind of work did your mother do?" "She fixed things that flew," Mia answered simply. "Big things, little things, broken things that everyone else said couldn't be fixed." The hangar's overhead door rumbled as another aircraft taxied past, the sound of its engines momentarily drowning out conversation. Through the opening, Vincent could see the normal rhythm of airport operations continuing around them. Pilots filing flight plans, ground crews servicing aircraft, the busy choreography of aviation that suddenly felt very far away from his current crisis. Ray Green appeared in the doorway, her radio crackling with air traffic control chatter. She was a compact woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent years coordinating the controlled chaos of flight operations. "Bobby," she called out, "I've got 3 more aircraft requesting hangar space for weather delays. How much longer are you going to need with Mr. Blackwood's bird?" "Still working on it, Ray. Could be a while." "Okay, I'll let Tower know to keep that slot flexible." Rye walked over to inspect their progress, nodding professionally at Vincent, before her eyes settled on Mia. "Well, I'll be, if it isn't our little airport mascot. Haven't seen you around in a few days, sweetheart. Vincent's attention sharpened. You know her? Sure do. Mia's grandmother, Janet, brings her out here most weekends. Kid's got a real fascination with aircraft, don't you, honey? Mia smiled for the first time since Vincent had been watching her. Hi, Miss Ray. I like watching the planes. More than watching, from what I've heard, Rye said with a warm chuckle. Betty Lou over at the diner was telling me how you helped that crop duster pilot figure out his engine trouble last month. Bobby's head snapped up. She did what? Now? Rye settled into the rhythm of a good story. Old Bill Peterson was having carburetor problems with his Cessna. Thing would run fine on the ground but start misfiring as soon as he got to altitude. Had him stumped for weeks. Then little Mia here takes one listen to the engine and tells him his float bowl gasket is swelling with temperature changes. Tommy whistled low. Was she right? Yep. A $40 gasket fixed a problem that was about to ground a $15,000 aircraft. Ray looked fondly at Mia. Girl's got her mother's ear for engines. Vincent felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in his mind. Her mother worked here. Ray's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Sarah Richardson was one of the finest pilots to ever work out of this airport. Military trained, flew everything from fighters to transports. After she got out of the service, she did charter work, cargo runs, whatever needed flying. What happened to her? The question created an uncomfortable silence. Rye glanced at Mia, who had gone very still, then back at Vincent. Medical emergency. About 6 months ago, Sarah was flying a mercy mission, getting medicine to a remote clinic during that big storm we had in early spring. Weather got worse than anyone predicted. She managed to get the supplies delivered, but Ray's voice trailed off. Mia spoke quietly without looking up. She didn't make it home. Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. Here was a child who had lost her mother in an act of heroism, living with her grandmother, spending her weekends at the airport where her mother had worked. And somehow, in the midst of her grief, she had absorbed enough aviation knowledge to diagnose problems that stumped experienced mechanics. His phone rang. This time he answered. Marcus, what do you have for me? Sir, I found a charter, but it's going to require 2 fuel stops, and you won't arrive until after 6 p.m. The meeting will be over. Vincent looked at the corroded relay Bobby still held, then at Mia, who was now sketching again in her notebook. What if I told you we might have the plane fixed today? Sir, I thought the mechanic said it was impossible without the part. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Vincent ended the call and addressed Mia directly. You mentioned adapting a compatible relay. How exactly would that work? Mia closed her notebook and stood up, her movements deliberate and confident. First, we'd need to find the right base component. The electrical specifications have to match exactly, but the physical mounting can be modified. She walked over to a workbench covered with various electronic components and spare parts, scanning the organized chaos with an expert eye. Then we'd need to fabricate a connector adapter, probably using parts from the old relay combined with standard electrical fittings. Bobby joined her at the workbench, his skepticism warring with genuine curiosity. And you think that would actually work? It would work, Mia said with quiet certainty. The question is whether you trust it to work well enough to fly. Vincent found himself studying this remarkable child with new eyes, She wasn't just precocious or lucky, she was demonstrating a depth of technical understanding that spoke of serious education and natural talent. The way she moved around the workshop, identifying components and explaining procedures, reminded him of the best engineers he'd worked with in his corporate acquisitions. "How long would this modification take?" he asked. Mia considered this carefully. With the right help, maybe 2 hours. But Mr. Knight would have to do most of the actual work. I can show him what needs to be done, but my hands are too small for some of the connections. Bobby was already pulling components from storage bins, his professional instincts overriding his doubts. "Tommy, get me the electronics kit and the precision tools and find me every compatible relay we have in stock." As the two mechanics began gathering materials, Vincent crouched down beside Mia again. "Why are you helping us?" he asked quietly. Mia's hand went to her necklace again, her fingers tracing the outline of the small wings. "Because that's what my mama would have done. She always said that when people are in trouble and you have the knowledge to help, you help. That's what the wings mean." Vincent stared at the pendant she touched so reverently. Something nagging at the back of his memory. There was something familiar about those wings, something that made his chest tighten with a recognition he couldn't quite place. "Those belong to your mother?" "Yes, sir. She earned them in the Air Force. She always wore them when she flew. Said they reminded her why she loved the sky." The nagging feeling grew stronger, accompanied by flashes of memory that Vincent couldn't quite bring into focus. A storm, an emergency landing, a pilot who had saved his life in circumstances he tried not to think about. But that was impossible. That had been years ago, and the pilot who had saved him. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Board meeting moved to 2:00 p.m., Chicago time, due to weather delays. Window still open if you can get airborne by noon." Hope and urgency surged through him in equal measure. "Mia, if we do this modification, how confident are you that it will work?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her 8-year-old face. "Confident enough that I'd fly in that plane myself." Vincent nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." The workbench became the center of focused activity as Bobby Knight laid out precision tools with the care of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Tommy Rodriguez wheeled over a diagnostic cart, its screen glowing with electrical schematics and component specifications. Mia stood between them, her small hands pointing to specific connections and pathways with the confidence of someone who had done this before. "The base relay we need is right there," Mia said, indicating a component in Bobby's parts bin. "Model 4A7 relay rated for 28 volts DC. The electrical characteristics are identical to the Gulfstream part, but the connector housing is different." Bobby picked up the relay, comparing it to the corroded original. "The pin configuration is wrong. We'd need to completely rewire the connector." "Not rewire," Mia corrected patiently. "Adapt. We can use the connector from the old relay, clean off the corrosion, and mate it to the new relay body. The tricky part is making sure the pin alignment stays perfect." Tommy squinted at both components through a magnifying glass. "The old connector's pretty chewed up. Some of these contact points are pitted beyond cleaning." Mia moved closer to examine the damage, her trained eye cataloging each problem area. "Pins 3 and 7 are the worst. We can replace those with standard electrical pins from your aircraft wiring kit. The others just need cleaning and retinning." Vincent watched this technical conference with growing amazement. He'd sat through countless engineering meetings in his corporate career, listened to teams of PhDs debate solutions to complex problems, but he'd never seen anyone break down a technical challenge with the clarity and practical wisdom this 8-year-old was demonstrating. Ray Green appeared at his shoulder, her radio quiet for the moment. "Pretty impressive, isn't she?" "Where did she learn all this?" Vincent asked quietly. "Sarah Richardson was a perfectionist when it came to aircraft systems. Story goes that when Mia was little, maybe 4 or 5, she used to sit in the hangar while her mama worked on planes. Sarah would explain everything she was doing like Mia was her apprentice, instead of her daughter." Vincent nodded, remembering similar moments from his own childhood. His father bringing him to board meetings, explaining business decisions as if Vincent could understand the complexities of corporate strategy at age 7. The difference was that Vincent had been learning about money and power. Mia had been learning about life or death systems that kept people safe in the sky. "Hand me that micro-soldering iron," Bobby said to Tommy. "We're going to have to be real precise with these connections." Mia stepped up on a small stool to get a better view of the work surface. "Before you start soldering, we should test each pin individually. My mama always said, measure twice, solder once." Tommy grinned. "That's a good rule." As Bobby began the delicate work of removing pins from the corroded connector, Mia pulled out her notebook and started sketching. But instead of the random drawings Vincent had assumed she was making, he realized she was creating detailed technical diagrams, mapping out the electrical pathways and connection sequences. "You're documenting the process," he observed. "Yes, sir. In case we need to do this again. Or if someone else needs to understand what we did." She looked up at him. "Seriously, my mama taught me that good mechanics always keep records." The attention to detail impressed Vincent more than the technical knowledge. In his business world, documentation was everything. The difference between success and litigation often came down to who had kept better records. Here was a child applying the same professional standards to aircraft maintenance that Vincent demanded from his corporate teams. Bobby's radio crackled. "Bobby, this is Control Tower. We've got incoming weather from the west. Light snow starting around 11 heavier by noon. Thought you should know." Vincent's stomach tightened. Weather delays could kill his narrow window of opportunity as effectively as mechanical failures. "How much time do we have?" Ray checked her weather display. "Current conditions should hold for another 2 hours, maybe 3. But if this system moves faster than predicted, we could be looking at ground stops by early afternoon." "Then we work faster," Bobby said, without looking up from his soldering. "Tommy, get me the circuit tester. We need to verify each connection as we make it." Mia moved to Tommy's other side, watching intently as he prepared the testing equipment. "The voltage should read steady at 28.5 when the connection is good. If it fluctuates more than 2V, the connection isn't solid enough for flight operations." Tommy paused in his setup. "How do you know the tolerance specifications for Gulfstream avionics?" "Same standards apply to most commercial aircraft systems," Mia replied matter-of-factly. "The FAA requires pretty strict electrical tolerances for critical navigation equipment." Vincent found himself pulling out his phone to verify this information, then stopped himself. He was fact-checking an 8-year-old's knowledge of federal aviation regulations. The absurdity would have been laughable if her track record hadn't been perfect so far. Betty Lou Parker appeared in the hangar doorway, carrying a thermal bag that smelled of coffee and fresh pastries. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of smile that made airports feel less impersonal. Thought you folks might need some fuel, she called out. Rye told me about your project. Over here. She distributed coffee cups and wrapped breakfast sandwiches, pausing when she reached Mia. Hot chocolate for our little engineer with extra marshmallows. Mia's face lit up with the first genuine childlike expression Vincent had seen from her. Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Heard you're fixing another airplane, sweetheart. Your mama would be real proud. The comment brought a moment of quiet to the group. Mia's expression grew thoughtful, her hand drifting to her necklace again. She used to say that every airplane has its own personality, Mia said softly. Some are easy to work with, some are stubborn, but they all want to fly. You just have to listen to what they're telling you. Bobby looked up from his work, a new respect in his eyes. That's about the wisest thing anyone's ever said about aircraft maintenance. As the morning progressed, the modified relay began to take shape. Bobby's experienced hands guided the precision work, while Mia provided technical oversight that would have impressed a seasoned avionics technician. Tommy learned more about electrical systems in 2 hours than he had in months of routine maintenance work. Connection test on pin 7, Bobby announced. Tommy read the voltmeter. 28.4 volts steady, good. Pin 5 next. 28.6, holding stable. Vincent watched this careful process with growing confidence and mounting anxiety. Each successful test brought them closer to a solution, but the clock kept ticking toward his deadline. His phone showed 11:45 a.m. Even if they finished the modification perfectly, they'd still need time for installation, system checks, and flight preparation. How are we doing? He asked. Bobby wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool hangar air. 3 more pins to go. Then we test the complete assembly before installation. Mia climbed down from her stool and walked over to the Gulf Stream, studying the open access panel with a critical eye. Once we get the relay installed, we'll need to run a complete navigation system diagnostic. That's probably another 20 minutes. And if the diagnostic shows problems, she met his gaze steadily, then we figure out what's wrong and fix that too. Her confidence was either inspiring or terrifying. Vincent couldn't decide which. Here was a child who had already solved one impossible problem and was calmly prepared to tackle whatever came next. In his corporate world, people with that kind of unshakable confidence usually either became legends or spectacular failures. Tommy's radio buzzed with a call from the fuel depot. Tower, this is ground services. We've got fuel delivery for November 77th, Whiskey Bravo, ready for pumping. Vincent recognized his aircraft's tail number. That's my plane. How long for fueling? Rye consulted her clipboard. Standard fuel load for a G650 to Chicago. Probably 30 minutes, including safety checks. Another variable added to an increasingly tight timeline. Vincent found himself calculating distances, flight times, and arrival schedules with the obsessive precision of someone whose entire future depended on being in a specific place at a specific time. Final connection test, Bobby announced. Pin 2, 28.5 volts, rock steady, Tommy reported. Bobby held up the completed assembly. The modified relay looked different from the original, with visible signs of the careful adaptation. It worked, but the electrical connections were clean and professional. Complete assembly test? Mia asked. Bobby connected the modified relay to his bench power supply and activated the test sequence. LED indicators flashed in precise patterns as the components cycled through its operational modes. Every light showed green. Perfect, Bobby said with satisfaction. This thing tests better than some factory components I've seen. Mia nodded approvingly, then consulted her notebook. Installation should take about 15 minutes. If everything goes smoothly, system diagnostic. After that, then we'll know if it actually works in the aircraft. Vincent looked at his watch. 11:10 a.m. The weather was holding, his fuel was being delivered, and they had a working solution to the mechanical problem. For the first time since early morning, he allowed himself to believe that he might actually make it to Chicago. But as Bobby and Tommy gathered their tools for the installation, Vincent noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the hangar doors, he could see the first tentative snowflakes beginning to fall. The snowflakes fell with increasing persistence, each one catching the hangar lights like tiny warnings against the gray Montana sky. Vincent watched them accumulate on the tarmac, while Bobby and Tommy prepared to install the modified relay. His phone showed 11:20 a.m., and the weather service was already updating their forecasts. "Ray," he called over to the operations manager, "what's the latest on that storm system?" Rye looked up from her weather display, her expression more serious than it had been an hour earlier. "Moving faster than predicted. We might have visibility restrictions by noon, possible ground stops by 12:30 if the snow gets heavy." Vincent felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with losing control of critical situations. In boardrooms, he could influence outcomes through preparation and negotiation. Here, he was at the mercy of weather patterns and the technical skills of people he'd met 3 hours ago. Bobby positioned himself beneath the aircraft's nose section, the modified relay in one hand and a precision screwdriver in the other. "Tommy, kill the main power to the avionics bay. I don't want any live circuits while I'm swapping components." "Power isolated," Tommy confirmed from the cockpit. "All navigation systems are dark." Mia stood nearby with her notebook, tracking each step of the installation process. Her small hands held a flashlight, directing the beam exactly where Bobby needed illumination without being asked. "Connection 1 secure," Bobby announced, his voice slightly muffled by the aircraft structure. "Copy that," Mia replied, making a notation. 7 more to go." Vincent marveled at their professional communication. An 8-year-old girl was serving as technical coordinator for a complex avionics repair and doing it with the competence of someone 3 times her age. He found himself wondering what other remarkable children might be overlooked simply because adults couldn't see past their age and circumstances. Janet Richardson appeared in the hangar doorway, her silver hair dusted with snowflakes and concern etched in the lines around her eyes. She was a woman in her 70s who carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered many storms. "Mia, sweetheart," she called out, "I saw the weather report on the news. Maybe we should head home before the roads get bad." Mia looked up from her coordination duties, torn between obedience to her grandmother and commitment to the project. "Grandma Janet, we're almost finished. Mr. Blackwood really needs his airplane fixed." Janet's gaze shifted to Vincent, sizing him up with the sharp assessment of someone who had learned not to trust appearances. "And you would be—" Vincent stepped forward, extending his hand. "Vincent Blackwood, your granddaughter has been extraordinary. She diagnosed a problem that had 4 mechanics stumped." "Connection 3 secure?" Bobby called out from beneath the aircraft. Janet nodded toward the work in progress. "Sarah always said Mia had the gift. Could spot problems in engines before the pilots even knew something was wrong." Her voice carried pride mixed with old grief. Sometimes I think she understands aircraft better than she understands other children. Has she ever considered formal training? Vincent asked. Aviation engineering programs, maybe starting with basic electronics courses. Janet's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Blackwood, we appreciate your interest, but Mia is 8 years old. She should be playing with dolls and learning to read chapter books, not fixing million-dollar aircraft. Connection 5 secure, Bobby announced. Halfway there. Mia looked between her grandmother and Vincent, clearly sensing the adult undercurrents of their conversation. Grandma, I like helping. Mama always said helping people was the most important thing you could do. Your mama also said you needed to have a normal childhood, Janet replied gently. Not spend every weekend at an airport. Vincent watched this family dynamic with growing understanding. Janet wasn't opposed to Mia's abilities. She was protecting her from the kind of adult responsibilities that could rob a child of her childhood. It was a reasonable concern, and one that made Vincent respect the older woman's wisdom. Tommy's radio crackled with an update from the control tower. All aircraft be advised, we have moderate snow beginning, with visibility dropping to 3 miles. Current conditions still within operational limits, but deteriorating. The fuel truck rumbled past the hangar doors, its driver giving a thumbs-up signal to indicate that Vincent's Gulfstream was topped off and ready. One more item checked off the pre-flight list, but the weather window was closing faster than anticipated. Connection 7 secure, Bobby reported. 1 more to go. Vincent's phone rang. Marcus, again, probably with updates about the Chicago meeting. Vincent answered on the first ring. What's the situation, Marcus? Sir, I've been monitoring weather along your route. You've got clear skies from Denver to Chicago, but there's a narrow window leaving Montana. If you can get airborne by 12:15, you should be fine. After that, it's looking questionable. Vincent checked his watch. 11:35 a.m. We're almost finished here. Stand by. He ended the call and addressed the group. We have 40 minutes to get this plane in the air. After that, weather's going to shut us down. Final connection secure, Bobby announced with evident satisfaction. Tommy, restore power to the avionics bay. The sound of electrical systems coming online filled the hangar as navigation displays flickered to life in the cockpit. Tommy moved through the startup sequence with practiced efficiency, checking each system as it initialized. GPS navigation online, he reported. Autopilot system responding, radio navigation active. A pause as he monitored the displays. All systems showing green. Bobby, whatever you did, it worked. Mia smiled for the second time that morning, her hand unconsciously touching her necklace. Mama always said aircraft want to work properly. Sometimes they just need the right encouragement. Bobby emerged from beneath the plane, wiping his hands on a clean rag. Full system diagnostic next. That'll tell us if our modification can handle actual flight conditions. Vincent felt his pulse quicken. They were so close to success, but every minute counted.